this afternoon. Do we have any apologies? Well, John will, because he's overseas. Eric, anybody else was short of? Alistair.
Alistair's away.
No, Alistair is an apology.
He's an apology, yes.
He rang me to say he couldn't make it 2 days ago. So would somebody like to move that those apologies be accepted? Moved by Jeremy, seconded by Bill. All in favour will say aye. Okay, we'll move to the Regulatory Services Standards Bill, and I'm sure we've got some people here who are going to walk us through this. Sounds like Hayley in the first instance. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for coming here today. It's nice to be able to do this in person as well, like some of the other submissions we have done. And perhaps this is a similar sort of conversation to the previous treaty principles bill. So this bill was developed by the Ministry for Regulation, led by Minister David Seymour, introduced to the House on May 19 this year under urgency. It is based on an earlier private members bill, previously known as the Regulatory Responsibility Bill, which was rejected 3 times, we note, by previous governments, various stages in the parliamentary process.
So, can I interrupt? Was that just the previous government or previous governments over time?
Over time.
So, was it always Labor? Was it sometimes a national-led government?
So this is part of the government seeking to give effect to the coalition agreement between National and the ACT Party, and which states, in the quote, that the parties will legislate to improve the quality of regulation, ensuring that regulatory decisions are based on principles of good lawmaking and economic efficiency by passing the Regulatory Standards Act as soon as practicable. We do note that the Ministry conducted a public engagement from the end of 2024 through to the beginning of 2025, and that engagement registered a strong public opposition. Approximately 0.33% of the 23,000 submissions supported or partially supported the proposed bill as it was, with around 88% opposing and the rest unsure. We note that Environment Southland did participate in the consultation process and launched a submission. There's a reference there in the papers for that submission. I think Marcus has just about got his tech working. So at that, I will hand over to Marcus and Shana.
Thanks very much. So Shana's done a fantastic job at pulling together a policy brief and a draft Environment Southland submission on the Regulatory Standards Bill, which we circulated on yesterday morning. So apologies for the short time frame to turn that round. But we think it's worthwhile working through the submission point by point. And basically what we'll do is we'll focus on the recommendations in the submission, and we'll get those as good as we can in terms of the agreement. And then we haven't got a whole lot of time, I guess, today, but we'll work through make sure the paragraphs above those recommendations reflect the recommendations. So we're focusing on the recommendations, and it might be a bit more of an expedient way of getting through the submission.
How do we ask questions? What's the process?
At any stage, it's a workshop format, so you're keen to hear any questions or thoughts as we work through. So
I've got one. On the front page there, it talks about the agreement made between the coalition parties, halfway down, and it says, blah, 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 by passing the Regulatory Standards Act as soon as practicable. How could the agreement be made when they didn't know what the Act was in the coalition discussions? Does that make sense to you?
yeah, certainly. I think there was a commitment in the parliamentary agreement, the coalition agreement, to progress it through to an act, because they held the majority of the the House. Effectively, they have the ability to make law as they saw fit. So I guess that was probably more in terms of the drafting, a reflection on what we saw in the coalition agreement.
but they didn't know what was in it.
Through you, Chair. Is your question also about the difference between the previous 3 iterations of this proposed legislation and the one now to a certain extent?
Well, unless they were just picking one of them and saying, this is the one we're going to put through, therefore National could have looked at it and says, yes, we'll pass that. Is that what happened? Because that's not what it says. Well, nothing I've heard in the media says that that's what they did. Because as it was approaching, when we did our first submission, the big noise was, well, how can you submit against it? It hasn't been drawn up yet. So if it hasn't been drawn up yet, how can it be agreed to?
Through you, Chair, I think that's a question actually for the parties involved in the coalition agreement.
And I think it is part of the coalition agreement. That's, so in the past, you probably had ACT that have had this private members type thing. But it's probably not actually going to help us as far as the...
No, it's not. It utterly doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, things are in this discussion document at the front, and it's got some. So I think we should discuss this. And it says elevation of libertarian values in lawmaking. Can someone explain what that word means? It's written down here, and I don't think we can just say that it's not part of it because it's written down. And it says libertarian perspectives are endorsed by the ACT Party.
What page is that on, please?
So it's in the physical paper, the policy brief here, right at the start. So does anyone want to highlight, well, attempt to highlight what libertarian values are?
So I guess through you, Chair, effectively it's a political perspective of a way of looking at so libertarian view is effectively a view that there's certain people that are given benefits and rights at birth, and they are the ones that should succeed through the process, and those that are less fortunate with incomes or jobs or that is just that's the way it is.
I really appreciate you doing that, and I'm being a bit facetious. I sort of know, but it's good. This is really important. Is about foundations of this, and I see what you've just said, Marcus. That becomes the foundation. It's not collective thinking. It's more driven around self-interest. Would that be a
definition is
thanks.
centered around individual liberty, personal responsibility, and minimal government interference.
Over collective
At their
action.
core, libertarians believe that people should be free to make their own choices, and as a whole.
So it's the balance between.
So that's that stuff.
Yeah.
So
Why are we discussing politics?
Yes.
Oh, well, it's in here in the paper, Neil.
I know, but
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman,
It's the first principles.
could we please focus on what
Mm.
Marcus asked us to do and not have a philosophical debate which could go for hours, and focus on what the recommendations are and see whether or not we agree with those. Otherwise, we won't get through this at all.
here.
Well, I've just flipped you through the regional sectors submission on this bill, which is quite comprehensive, which also could be quite useful. It's come through in the last couple of days, but you'll have probably seen it, have you, Marcus?
Yeah. And I guess the purpose of working through this one in a more detailed approach with council is to try and get a council position on it, because there's some things in here that, particularly around how they propose to recognise treaty principles, legislation moving forward, and also some back capturing process. So I think if we work through the recommendations, we can go from there. I'm conscious we have got a national direction component to the workshop this afternoon as well, and it's scheduled roughly about half an hour to get through the submission.
Could I just ask, did we invite our iwi reps to this meeting?
Yes.
Yeah.
It seems important that they would be there. Not that we're making a serious decision, but I just wanted.
Yes, they were invited.
Sorry, I don't mean to make song and dance. I didn't mean to upset you, but I think I'm really clear that the core principles of this must be understood and what it actually means. Then you can move forward. And you might say it's political, but it's still real and it still sits underneath everything. So
Sure. So I guess the key part of the submission is that the draft submission is we recommend that Environment Southland does not support the bill. Although it agrees that the Parliament scrutiny of the legislation is a cornerstone of healthy democracy, this council considers that enhancing this bill in its current form entails significant risk that outweigh the potential benefits. So I guess that's probably the fundamental position that I think we probably need to get a agreement on in terms of before we progress to the next steps, and I'll try and move forward if there's no agreement for that one. So the key points of the submission are, rather than introducing a new bill, existing mechanisms for enhancing parliamentary scrutiny could be strengthened. This would minimise unnecessary regulation and administrative complexity. If the bill was to proceed in the second reading, the bill should be amended to address the significant issues it raises, while also maximising potential opportunities. One of the key opportunities can be realised by amending the bill to provide a clear mandate for effective implementation planning by national lawmakers. The drive to elevate the private property rights above other fundamental rights risk undermining the balance of principles that underpin New Zealand's democratic society. In the long term, this may significantly hinder the government's ability to protect public interest in many areas, including in environmental management, resulting in perverse outcomes.
Just a grammatical moment in there. Need to take that off. Yeah.
That is, Marcus, that's this critical bit that you just read
Drive
out
to
just
elevate
then.
private property rights.
Property rights over the collective good. So when we talk about the job that we do in the environment, it is in the commons, you can say that's the collective good of everybody, so that could be at risk.
Correct.
Absolutely. And also when they talk about private property rights, you've got to recognise that corporations are regarded as a person. So it's not just a matter of some bloke over here on his acre. It's a much bigger issue than it seems at first read.
Through you, Chair, this bill does provide for such concepts like that we have discussed in other workshops, such as compensation for regulatory takings, and to your point, Councillor Guyton, corporations are natural persons under the law, and this would provide for that. Similar that happens that we see overseas, and it actually has been impacted here in New Zealand around investor state dispute tribunal work, which can have a chilling effect on those mandated entities set to apply environmental regulation.
I'm just searching for things we actually like about this legislation and I'm not hearing it, apart from what Paddy's just pointed out to us.
Yeah, quite right.
Yeah, and in general terms, I think it's awful. Can you use that term?
And I suspect.
Yeah, rather than going through it piece by piece and trying to pull it to pieces, they're not going to listen to that, I don't think.
And it flies in the face of some of the national instruments, you know, if we can put property rights ahead of highly productive land. So they're totally at odds. So I suspect this is another coalition agreement that will go to the first reading. But I think we just go through this. I think staff's done a very good job from what I've read here so far. It's pretty similar to the very comprehensive one. The Greater Wellington one is probably even harder hitting. It's there's sort of no room for not understanding where they're coming from, and it's very much opposed to it.
Two things from me. I know that's not in any particular order necessarily, but I would put the paragraph about failing to acknowledge totality at the beginning and in the middle and in the end somehow. But certainly, and overall, to the chairman's point, I would word things much more strongly if it was me, but it also depends on my colleagues' feelings. But I think we could be as forceful as we can in some of these issues because they're fundamentally challenging.
Marcus, I just endorse what Lyndall said. I think it's absolutely important that we talk about our role as a regional council in protecting the natural environment, and how do we do that? Phil's had his climate change meeting this morning. How do we go about our work under this regime? It seems quite seems like it's going to be quite difficult to do.
Yeah, and I guess the devil's always in the detail. It's hard to know exactly what that would look like in practice, because I guess this is a bill that informs every other bill that comes out. So it's almost the architecture, the future architecture of every bill coming out needs to go through this process. So it's in a bill itself, it's sort of a bill that rules all the bills.
The one
you know what I
bill.
mean? So I think, the point is very clear that we're hearing is that this is an important piece that we need to take a pretty strong stance on. Is there a collective agreement that we need to strengthen the wording from the circulated draft?
Oh, yeah.
Well, yes, but how much work will that take, staff? Nothing much. Just put some swear words in.
Marcus, can I ask, did you aspire to go harder when you drafted this and thought,
Initially,
I'm
we
going to hold
started-
off and wait and see what the council
Initially, we
do?
started a little bit softer and then went through exec, and exec was like, make it harder. And then,
Went through me, actually.
yeah, Hayden was like, make it harder. And then, so this is the current version. It's been strengthened from where it was, but if there's an intent, and I'm hearing there is, to make it even stronger, then, yeah, we can certainly redraft it. I think the submission's due late this month, so we have got it
We have 4 more days,
4 more
according
days.
to the clock. I
on
checked
Monday.
from my own-
Use a thesaurus or change some of the words.
Although personally, I think that you've hit it right here. I don't think there's any need to make up any more noise. There's going to be a lot of noise coming. If they can clearly understand what our position is, they don't need to know that we're angry. They're going to help, in my view. But that's only my view.
I just thank the staff for the work that they've put into this, and it does sum up what I believe is the feeling around the room. But some of the wording could be tightened up so that we show that we are quite opposed to some of the principles that are being put forward. Not just we're doubtful about them, but we're actually opposed as a council. That's my thought.
Can I ask, is there any mechanism in the proposal that would prevent a subsequent government amending this or changing the set of principles? If it goes ahead with this set of principles, and then after the election and there's a new government seat at the table, could they potentially amend it and change the set of principles to be a little bit more treaty focused and community focused and less libertarian values focused?
Yeah, correct. Effectively, government power can make any changes to any law they choose. So that's certainly an opportunity. I guess
Is it?
we've
Sorry.
survived this long without having this piece of
Yeah, I
legislation and enable the different pieces to go through the necessary processes with regulatory impact statements or cultural impact statements as part of the good practice of lawmaking. We need an act to tell us how to make good lawmaking from here forward. Is
I was wondering if there was no mechanism that David Seymour has invented to lock in, this shall not be changed the next decade.
It's a good question.
It's
and
actually,
he
and I'm
wouldn't do
not
it
quite,
if
I
there
don't
wasn't.
know if you're, sorry to cut across, I'm not sure. We need to check that. I think because in our paper, we do note that this creates, others have commented that this effectively establishes a form of regulatory constitution. So any law seeking to amend this law would presumably have to,
Be
I'm looking to the
passed
lawyer
under-
here,
yeah,
would
exactly.
presumably need to be compliant with this law.
Mm.
And hence others calling it a form of regulatory constitution.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so I guess, so that's, my concern would be, is there a lock-in effect that then inhibits your ability to
sorry.
fix it subsequently? Or does it simply become harder to fix for that very reason?
I believe that we currently within our legal system, there wouldn't be any barriers from to amending the bill in the future by the government if they desire.
But it's-
I've got Morris, then Robert.
I know, I was just supporting the need to make it stronger, and certainly the point Phil brings up is important to make sure that it's not something that's locked in forever. That's really important.
Look, at the moment, we just submit on the bill as we feel, and future will be the future. I've got Robert, then Jeremy.
Just an opinion, the idea of it being locked in won't necessarily be through this mechanism, but if in the meantime, overseas companies invest with the proviso that if it gets overturned, we have to pay compensation. That's where the rub is. If it's going to cost us too much, say we've got a Liberal government in, it costs too much to go back on these things. It's all, it's not straightforward.
Jeremy,
I was just reading, browsing over the Greater Wellington Regional Council submission, and they're forceful in their language to say, just immediately withdraw the bill, certainly in the present form, so to speak. So they're going to get some pretty big pushback anyway. So I don't see any harm in firming up what we believe and how we're working and things. Yeah, no problem.
Could I just ask two things quickly?
You go.
Oh, just very quickly. If Nicole's correct in saying that it's not going to get past the second reading or whatever, how does that relate to the promise, the coalition promise, that they will pass the Act? I don't see that. I can't understand how that might be. The second thing is just a note that Seymour's own Ministry of Regulation has recommended against what's going ahead here. His own ministry, which he created. So it's a pretty strange set of situations we're facing, isn't it? Thank you.
Peter,
Well, you just want to say, so the work that we're involved is, so if this bill was to pass, would we have some difficulty in undergoing, say, for instance, example, a plan change that we want to do to get collective action across the region on water quality? Would that be at risk, those processes, or would we find another way around them?
Through the chair, at this stage, the bill only relates to acts of parliament, not secondary legislation such or secondary regulation such as regional council plans. But I guess with this going through, then it would be assumed that the new resource management replacement would need to go through this process and be more framed around these principles, and therefore the impact of that would be the cascade of how that new regulation was drafted. It would have a consequence on the role of regional council and what it could mandate and regulate through secondary regulation such as regional water and land plan and other aspects of regional council business.
Thank you.
And I think basically we just go through this point by point. It's no use speculating about the future. We've got something in front of us. We just need to have clear reactions to it. And we've always found with bureaucracies in government, if you use too many nice words, that they can miss your point. Being short and blunt, it's always worked for me. There's no ability to misinterpret.
Having said that, you still have to speak their language if you want to get their attention.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but they have ways of putting things, and I think what's been stated here is actually very well done.
Yeah, I agree.
To answer Phil's question, it would be, we don't have a constitution like the United States. We have to move the whole world to make any changes. Legislation can be amended or even abandoned by our parliament in the future.
So I'm hearing is Madam Peter agree with we would land it and a strengthening. So what we might do from here is, instead of working through point by point, is take it back and do a strengthening up and then work through the normal process, and we'll put the final version up for retrospective approval through council paper and get it approved in retrospect.
Will you send that to us in any way?
Yes.
Thank you.
You've laid a good foundation.
Yes.
I compliment the staff on what
Practice
they've done.
sense test our
Yeah,
thinking
and it certainly
too.
wasn't meant as a criticism, I just think we could be.
Yep, and we should have drafted it a bit harder from the start, I think.
Used to having to go gently.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. That's good. We bring it to governance, and they say to strengthen it. That's
Yep.
good. So, yeah. So we're more happy on that basis.
Yep.
Marcus and the team to go away and firm things up.
Yeah.
And while the regional sector one is a lot stronger, you don't want them to be identical. You want obviously there's going to be some fairly common themes coming through. And
Seymour also has a bulk.
Yeah.
And do we ask to speak?
Yes, yep, that's very common practice. Speak to the select committee to, oral submission or orally support our submission. Thanks very much, and we've got roughly an hour for the next part. So national directions, the next topic we've got. So you'll be aware that government's released a great big package of national direction. So we're looking to have a workshop with councillors just to, I guess, confirm our priorities around the pieces that we're looking to work on and then try and get some messaging. So I guess this is more of a workshop form. So the purpose is to build the awareness of you as councillors and then confirm priorities and then get any views you've got. So effectively, national direction, what is it? So it provides a clarity of government's priorities moving forward. So with the change of government, one of the things they can do quite quickly is change national direction, and they've made progressed a bill through Parliament already that enables them to make faster changes to national direction. So instead of having to go through the submission process and hearings and bits and pieces, the minister can make quite quick decisions. So they're progressing forward on that now, and it drives, I guess, national consistency across all of local government in this space moving forward. So that's the purpose of national direction. It sort of downscales the Act into more bite-sized chunks and tells you exactly how you can progress forward in a simple sense. So why is it important? Our regional planning documents need to give effect to national direction. So effectively our regional policy statement, our regional planning documents, our resource consents, all need to give effect to national policy changes. So whether it's a national policy statement or a national environmental standard, we need to be consistent and do what's required in those more specific documents. And when they're approved, it's going to have immediate effects, particularly on our resource consenting arm. We need to approve decisions in accordance with the new national policy direction and national environmental standards. And then there will be a consequence as well in terms of amending our planning documents as well with the planning team that this is in charge of, and working it through the process with regional policy statement or regional plan changes to give effect to those policy directions. It outlines national direction for regional planning, so we talked about that already, but it's also going to be the bridge between the current Resource Management Act system and then the new replacement Resource Management Act. It's the bridge, I guess, that's going to bring us from where we currently are under the current RMA framework for decision making around our aspects that we're in charge of in a regional sense, but also give us an indication of where we're heading in the new system and be a transition document. There'll be potentially some little upgrades and amendments once that new planning framework is in. So largely what we're seeing now will be part of the new system, so it gives us an opportunity to get some clarity. Last box on the right there is how much energy should we put into this? You could spend hundreds and hundreds of hours on this sort of work, but it's hard to know exactly how much benefit we're going to get. But we need to maintain a high degree of awareness just to understand the implications on our business as usual, particularly in the consenting space, and also the future of water and land plan and our aspirations in that space as a regional council. It's invariably going to alter our program of works. We've been waiting for the national direction to provide some clarity around the next steps for a lot of our work, and we're starting to get a little bit of clarity. We are on election time for a local government, and the new law hasn't landed yet, so there's still a little bit of uncertainty there, but it gives us a little bit of an indication of the next steps and where to go to. But most importantly, I think, and we've just sort of talked about a little bit with the Regulatory Standards Bill, it's a great opportunity to articulate our Southland perspective on these proposed national documents. And we've heard the sector say a number of times that one size doesn't fit all, and we need to make sure that anything that we see in these national policy direction documents where it doesn't work for Southland, we need to identify what that is and why it doesn't work, and articulate alternatives to Wellington to make sure that we can still have our regional variability to be unique to Southland.
So is the wording still in here in the past? You could always go above a national direction, you couldn't go below it, where there's been rhetoric that you couldn't go above. Is that wording there or not?
Different pieces of the national direction have different components in that space. So there's a number of different documents that have different nuances, particularly, for example, the forestry environmental standard, National Environmental Standard for Forestry. It's quite clear that you can't regulate more than these two specific aspects. So if you want to be more stringent and say, actually, there's a harder line here on these aspects, you can't do that in terms of writing your regional rules. So there certainly are instances where it is confining the swim lanes, so you've got narrow ability to regulate, and in some cases you can regulate to be a little bit more.
So in that case, Cuban effects or even a revised highly productive land thing wouldn't be tools we can actually use. We're sort of talking about zones for things too, aren't they? It's not, yeah.
Yeah, and likewise with the forestry perspective, you can't be more stringent and say, actually, you can't put in these species in these locations because of these impacts. It basically as if it's.
So it is a challenge. In some of the instances, it's quite a challenge to provide regional specificity given the Southland context. And one of those might be, for example, the forestry piece to recognise the specific challenges that we're facing here in Southland.
So the way it reads, things like Douglas fir and other wildings, we can't regulate. That would be a real worry.
Yeah, there is a national calculator, and there has been one for some time, but it's sort of proven that it isn't fit for purpose in a Southland sense. And that's certainly one of the aspects we've got an eye on with these packages is highlighting those actual things that the environmental standards saying we can't be more stringent in these locations, and we feel that we need a greater set of tools to be able to manage the future potential impacts.
And that's why one of our the bullet point right at the end there, and that's been kind of one of the drivers of a lot of the work that we've been doing to date in terms of engaging with various ministry officials, has been putting across from both a regulator and also a practitioner perspective as well, from either being in the farming sector or as planners, lawyers, etc. The Southland experience and those unique factors and context, as well as the outcomes that the people and communities and businesses of Southland have said they want Environment Southland to deliver for them, and what proposals might mean in the Southland context.
So how much is that? My concerns about some of the national directions, how much is the minister or the government constrained or allowed to do stuff under these national directions? And I'm just thinking of a worst case scenario that we have a minister for mining who comes down here and says, I want more coal mines in Southland, you won't need a permit for those in the future. National direction, we want a whole lot of coal mines in this area.
Yeah, effectively, there is the tools currently that allows the minister to be able to make national direction if they so chose to in that space. They could go through that process with little consultation and just be able to make that decision with the
So it can be, from our point of view, quite a random decision by a minister or the government.
Yeah, probably highly unlikely that they would do that sort of, and I guess.
Yeah, I'm just saying the worst thing that could happen, yeah.
Yeah, potentially that could be something that could happen. So effectively, the government's consulting on 4 packages. So I'll put them up on the screen. So the first package is infrastructure and development. Second one is primary sector. Third one is freshwater, and the fourth one is the housing one, which came out a day or so ago, and I haven't had a chance to actually update the final one. We haven't dived into any analysis on that housing package yet. Haley's read it.
Congratulations.
So
Over the cornflakes this morning.
There's a number of things going on, and what we've tried to do is, I guess, highlight the bits that are a higher priority to Environment Southland, and I just want to confirm that's what your thinking is and where we want to spend our energy, and then what we're going to do is then workshop a couple of those topics just to make sure that we can harvest as much as we can around your thinking on those aspects. So in package 1, we've got the National Policy Statement for Infrastructure, and the next one is amendments to National Policy Statement for Renewable Energy Generation. So those two we deem, we've got a higher interest in, whereas less of an interest in electricity transmission, telecommunications facilities, granny flats, public housing, less of an interest in those, but the one down there at the bottom of the National Policy Statement for Natural Hazards is something we need to have a high piece.
The one on renewable electricity generation has big implications for us, particularly in relation to the Waiau. And it's really important that we make a submission that allows for changes to be made when the consents come up, because there's a real danger that they want to lock in what we've got there already, which isn't satisfactory, so that we need to make, need to have that ability to make changes.
The discussions around the exec table already have put the Waiau lens very much at the forefront when starting to look at what the implications are for these proposed changes. So absolutely, that's the first thing that we talked about when looking at it. So
I would be wanting to understand the impact on the wind generation and the consent applications and the works or not as well.
And certainly we're aware in other geographies, including Southland, there's a lot of discussion around the intersection between the renewable electricity generation and highly productive land changes as well, and a lot of concerns that are being reflected in the media and through different agencies about the impact on the use of productive land for renewable electricity generation. And we've seen a lot of community angst and concern when proposals have been mooted either through a traditional RMA consenting pathway or indeed through a fast track Approvals Act pathway. So those are kind of two things that we're putting together when we look at these, as well as looking at them independently.
So package 2, what we consider spending our energy on is National Environmental Standard for Marine Aquaculture and the National Environmental Standard for Commercial Forestry and amendments to the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, but less emphasis on highly productive land, less emphasis on the stock exclusion regulations, and less emphasis on the mining and quarrying provisions around biodiversity, highly productive land and freshwater. Some of those aspects are what we do, but given the breadth of national direction that's changing, we've thought that was a lesser priority, but happy to hear views contrary to what we think.
Well, I would have thought stock access is pretty important, wetlands and rivers. It's a big issue, and I mean, a lot of places are fenced off here, but nationally, it's probably more of a problem than other parts, but certainly a big issue. We don't want, the gains that we've made now to be lost. So I thought that would be.
I don't think we can elevate that up.
And I would agree from a farming point of view that we're dealing with waterways and stock exclusions, hugely important. So I thought that would have been a bit of a priority. I know even more so than, I'm not too stressed about commercial forestry because that's just that is part of it. Probably people feel, we're probably getting stressing about a thing that's not. There are a few farms going in trees, but it's not completely madness or anything. So, but the stock exclusion is actually reasonably important for us to make sure those rules certainly are adhered to or not necessarily watered down. There has to be some practicalities about it. They're obviously looking at extensive farming, but
some of the technology coming through, like the halter
Yeah,
technology, on that extensive country, you can actually exclude them from waterways without actually having a fence. And that was always the issue in high country where it wasn't practical. Plantation forestry one, if there's no ability to have fire breaks and all those sorts of things, that is a concern. Well, I think it is something we need to watch, that it's not made more permissive than it is, and it's been responsible for stuff going over the fence, which was always quite weak in the past.
Just the amendments to the commercial forestry, that's more prepping the way for planting on conservation land, is it not? Because that's the government's stated goal.
Yeah, I don't think it's inherent in the environmental standard that considered as much as that, but effectively it's trying to minimise the ability for councils to regulate the space. And we'll be able to dive into that and probably break that into tables and talk about those aspects.
So it's the next step of what they wish to do.
Sorry, does that deal with wilding pines? Is that Is that an issue with that? Because that's a pretty big issue for us.
Yeah, so there is a framework within the environmental standard for plantation or commercial forestry that they need to submit a wilding calculation.
Yeah.
And that's reasonably subjective and hasn't proven to be that effective in terms of managing the issue in a southern
It
sense.
needs to be improved. I mean, people that plant these things need to be responsible for them, not somebody else.
Can I just give a wee bit of insight there? MPI have really toughened up their processes. They've stopped applications to the emissions trading scheme until they get questions asked and responded to. That's only happened in the last couple of years, so it's been an emphasis. But what I would like to know is what happens in the offices of the Southern District Council. So you might have a bit of an idea, because the questions go there, not to Environment South, and we're part of the process, are we not? But we're not the decision-making entity around this. How does that work? I'm worried about no one over at the SDC really understanding
Yeah, so
what's going on.
TAs or territorial authorities and the regional councils don't have that say around the emissions trading scheme. It's both councils have a process of looking at where the trees are going on the land and if there's any setback requirements or wilding calculations in those aspects. An emissions trading scheme application goes directly from the landowner to MPI and back to the landowner. It's inherent runs on the land piece rather than it's not the councils that either side communicating or having a conversation
Probably
about
didn't ask the
trading
question
schemes.
very well, I'm sorry about that, but mainly around the wilding calculator.
Oh, yeah, and
The input that the district council has there, and the expertise they have to make good decisions at that point.
yeah, and it generally they rely on the Environment Southland biosecurity team for those questions around wilding. So it's
So it's
well, that's
just,
how it works.
so that question passes through the SDC office and then straight to here.
Yeah.
And you get a ring from Keith or something like that.
Yeah, Jolie.
Yeah.
So for package 3, what we see as a priority is rebalancing freshwater management through multiple objectives, rebalancing Te Mano Te Wai, providing flexibility for the national objectives framework, enabling commercial vegetable growing, addressing water security and storage, and simplifying the wetland provisions. Those are the ones we deem are higher importance. Lower importance is the fish passage, which is really hard to say. And then addressing remaining issues with the farmer-facing regulations, i.e. synthetic nitrogen fertiliser. We deem that industry will already be in that space and advocating, so potentially less of an opportunity for us. But can hear otherwise. And the last one that we see as a lower priority is including mapping requirements for drinking water sources. In terms of, it's probably a good thing, but is it worth our energy being in that space? We think with the highlights and adding in the stock exclusion regulations is probably enough for us to sink our teeth into in the next 4 to 5 weeks to get this mission pulled together.
Wasn't the rebalancing of Te Mano Te Wai, that's how that was described a number of years when it came in to our discussions. It was a rebalancing mechanism in itself, and now they're saying they need to what is it?
Yeah, rebalancing.
So it needs to be rebalanced itself. I thought it was a balancing
There's
mechanism
more of a
itself.
prioritisation of the different ways of looking at the environment first, municipal use second, and then commercial use thereafter. Was sort of set out a hierarchy of how you should be considering water use.
I just want people to know that if you don't have that balance in there, like Te Mano Te Wai, economics just takes over and smashes everything. It's just, we all know that, don't we? Folks? Sure.
Mr. Chairman, the elephant in the room with freshwater is the absence of limits from any discharge, whether it's there are limits on discharge from a pipe, but there's no limits from discharge from non-point source pollution. I know there's all these standards like periphyton standards and water clarity and that sort of thing, but until we get a limit on what's allowed to be discharged from a particular area and can control that and then improve it if it needs to be improved, then all these other things are not going to achieve anything. So I wonder, I read through this yesterday and written 2 or 3 pages of comments and answering all their questions, there's about 25 questions. Would it be okay to send that through to you, and would other councillors think that's all right?
Yeah, well, if there any thoughts you've got on any of the packages, and it's understood too, the freshwater package is still in development, and there's going to be another phase of consultation down the track a little bit. But yeah, we're keen to hear any thoughts you've got, anywhere we can, collect your opinions, and from a rural perspective or an urban perspective, and make sure we've well articulated the position of council.
Okay, thank you. Just when you see the yellow and the non-yellow, what you're waiting? I'm just trying to understand that. I take it you're still looking at those other things that aren't yellow.
Yeah, less sort of focus effectively. Like the focus will be on the yellow, and then if we get time, then we might do a little bit, but generally we'll try and get the steer from council.
So when I look at the addressing remaining issues with the farmer facing regulations, you're indicating industry sort of looking after that. That'll probably send up a few red flags for some around the council table, and even myself sometimes. You go, well, as industry, that we need to still keep an eye on how it's going, and always reflecting back onto our water and land plan of what the community and the regional forum and all that, how it aligns up with. I just want to see the consistency that we're not allowing or saying what we need to say when we need to say it, so to speak, and having oversight of what's going on. And I mean, even I know the simplifying fish passage solutions. I mean, that's caused a wee few problems. Practical understanding and developing those ideas. They're important because we are a farm, a fairly large farm south, and so there seems to be a wee bit of focus off the farming when the majority of what we talk about is fix the rural, or where we want the stuff to be done is in the rural area. So I'm just trying to get around the weighting of how you're.
I think I can answer that through you, Chair, Marcus, and he's free to kick me under the table if I've got it completely wrong. It's not that we're ignoring those non-highlighted ones. What we would be looking at is following the conversation, checking for alignment with our own adopted plans, strategies, policy positions, and keeping an eye out for where is Te Utakahika, the regional sector, on that direction as it evolves. Where is industry participating, and are there in that kind of collective view any fatal flaws from the perspective of Environment Southland? And if we did observe those, then I think we would get the yellow highlighter out and participate at that time. But what we're saying here is that it's a watching brief for those ones, checking for alignment, checking for nothing that would be catastrophic or critically important for Environment Southland. At the moment, there seems to be a general trajectory on those, that there is some alignment, but we're keeping an eye on it. It's probably how to articulate what we're doing in those areas. But I do know we did have a conversation about the need for simplifying fish. It is hard to say. Fish passage. So that'd be one that I'm now deeply interested in following our conversation, and so I will be keeping myself an eye on that one. Yeah, simplification is good as far as we're concerned, as long as the trajectory leads to the outcome that we want to see.
Can I ask, you mentioned that you think industry's got the farmer-facing issues. When you say industry's going to be engaging in that, who are you talking about?
Well, I think everybody's got the opportunity to submit on these. So there will be forest and birds, there will be farmers, there will be EDS, there will be a whole host of industry and interested parties all interfacing in that. And it's, look, our thinking was, do we need to have a voice in there? Potentially we do. And if we do, we do. Then, but maybe it was less of a focus than some of those other areas which are possibly higher interest.
So it's actually some of the industry NGO watchdogs kind of.
100%.
Diverse voices, perhaps, is what we need to say. I mean, we have a limited amount of resources. I'm sure you're all aware. We have to be quite careful with how we spend it for ratepayers, and this is an unprecedented volume of change in our patch, and so we're having to kind of pick winners in a way, things that we really care about.
And something else we need to keep in mind is that there's been a lot of work done in the organisation within some of these topic areas, although they might have had slightly different headings back in the day. And so I guess that keeping the priority order around some of the work that we're already halfway through or part of the way through, so that we can make progress on the time and energy and cost of the work that's been done already. That's important to me anyway.
Sorry, just around the vegetable growing, is that a real concern? Is that something, I know there's environmental issues with it, but is it really something that is going to be what part of that's a worrying or concerns from environmental, or is it just we think that climate change, you're going to get a lot more of that activity down here, or just why is it a focus? I suppose that's what can I ask? Sorry.
Because there was some reports came from a previous council, and Morris was here then, and a different chairman. So it's way back about vegetable growers are the worst appliers of nitrogen. They apply the heaviest amount of nitrogen, even ahead of dairy farms.
Yeah, that's
so vegetable farming is really intensive land use. So I think it's something we need. And the tulip farm at Wyndham was one that was mentioned as sort of at the same level.
It also impacts the highly productive land, right? It dovetails into that conversation majorly.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that it's to be made largely permitted activity. So monitoring that might be difficult.
We are seeing very slowly because of climate change. Apples are moving south, and we will, over time, see, other vegetable crops starting to be grown here.
But it's still a long way before it has a material impact.
Still be sweat.
We haven't got 2,000 intensive vegetable growers, have we?
Not Pukekohe.
You only need to look at the economics project to see the influence on overseer with vegetables and sheep and beef. It pumps up one paddock, pumps up the overall losses and things. But anyway, that's delving in.
You know what it'll be like when the vegetables come in. It's like the trees. You can't eat trees. You can't eat vegetables. Oh yes, you can eat vegetables. So we'll wait for that campaign.
No, all good.
Even permitted activities can have parameters, and we know with both of those industries, they have to do at least a 7-year rotation, and that tells you a bit about how much goes on the first couple of years. So.
There are ways that you can reduce losses.
I guess maybe it's just for the experience of time, we're keen to jump into.
I will be keeping just an eye on the housing growth piece, because it does have a connection into spatial planning, regional spatial planning, and there are some pretty grunty directions and suggestions from the ministry about potentially allocating our housing targets. And so, if we don't set appropriate ones ourselves, well, at least territorial authorities. So we are just keeping a bit of an eye on that with regards to regional spatial planning as well.
Last slide I've got is just a bit of a next steps from here. So progressing through the decision-making process, minister directions, and then instrument drafting, and then they'll pop out and straight into action effectively in terms of having legal effect. So what we're going to do is, next steps, we're going to get some paper, and I'll introduce Claire Jordan. For those who don't know Claire, who's helping us out in the drafting space. She's been helping out in the policy briefs and going to help facilitate a table, and then we're going to divvy up into teams. But what we might do is have a freshwater package sitting up where front left, and then we'll have commercial forestry over where Councillor Rodway is. We'll have marine aquaculture, maybe in this corner. And then we'll have natural hazard decision making, the chair sitting, and then we might, at a couple of back tables, have coastal policy statement on that table, and marine aquaculture mixed in. So I think we've got 5 tables. So we'll go. Energy infrastructure. Cool. So freshwater, forestry, marine,
Natural hazards.
James, Neil.
I often am a natural hazard.
Didn't like to say anything.
So what we'll do is we'll have 15 minutes. So instead of all going to freshwater first, if we try and spread ourselves out, if we'll try and have a couple of rotations of your views out, and we'll capture them, describe them, and
How do you want us
capture as much as we
how do you want
can.
us to manage these, Michaela? Do you want us just to leave them all or not?
Possibly you could just use the main camera. and
Just close it?
Putting it into that cheap beef farm, so it's all. phenomenal elevation.
I'm thinking about this sidebar conversation.
I get all the other ends.
So you would change your forestry or would you?
Well, we are farm. I'm saying, stop. Three sisters. Trying to get them going.
Hi, Marina.
I'll do forestry.
No,
So what we've done is we've got
There's drive from.
9 different topics, but we've combined the objective related ones.
Forestry one.
We're forestry.
All with different.
So what are we gonna write down?
Marcus is gonna.
Write down on post-it notes, write it on paper, or write on a screen. Occasionally, so at the moment, it's the sole objective of the National Benefit Statement. But illegal, kind of sets up at the top, not inside of trade.
Questions, you got some questions, I don't know.
Yeah, so the proposed changes to create efficiencies in the forestry operations and consenting provide clarity for users. Key proposals remove council's discretion to more stringent regulate regional rules in the environmental standard in relation to afforestation and giving effect to the freshwater requirements of the SFM.
Okay, so we can't give those regional rules. The East Coast and the North Island and the soils and what the soil television.
Smart Phil, smart.
It's not that heavy here in the south.
As well.
So there is some proposed changes to slash management, so enabling impacts around slash and erosion, less in the boarding space, less in the plant, especially around wildfire.
So it talks about sediment quite a bit.
I think what you might
Yeah,
do
it's
is
not a fair bit on.
there was a change that was made to the resource management to section 1 and 7.
Nice.
It's a step for the decision making. So basically,
Equal impact in the first 5 years and the last 5 years.
Industry was successful that
There's
market was
Harvest time.
found that where the water was already degraded, they could have granted consent. But the intent of the DPCA has always been in the region. So councils have to go through to set the goals for the region and each catchment of the community and then figure out how to improve over time if compliance needed to be able to get there. So that sort of time was always envisaged by the and then the change to the decision making
notice to
requires that if a decision is made to grant consent, then conditions have to be put in place to ensure that there is
geographical
approval
nature
of
of
the
the
consent. So it's
impact on
sort
adjoining
of
neighbours.
taking a similar approach to ensure that there's improvement.
Unfortunately, if you farm
The tricky
forest like that, you don't get recognised
at
on
this
the
process
value.
case because we haven't gone through that.
That's just the reality. If they go through and drone where the trees are.
How we're going to.
So certainly
There's
high quality water bodies,
certainly how much improvement is required and how quickly.
setback issue, because you need kilometres to make that
This is
effective.
their selling.
Any other setback concerns around water bodies, private property?
Interpreted, we've got to have drinking water, really what else.
You don't seem to be backing away from any
That's what
liability.
the options there.
Or is that just in relation to this?
No,
that's
for everything.
Yeah.
Should there be facilitated firefighting?
Yeah.
Just some chance to get into this.
Well, are we considering that?
Provisions they. Strength.
I think so.
Thanks, so.
That was the change in MT2.
2020, yeah, that's covered.
So that's the excess that goes
That's the first
back,
couple.
Yeah.
that goes back to a well-maintained road.
And tomato.
Yeah.
Was this putting roads in?
Yes,
That's
that's
right.
I know, but access is the key to firefighting.
Yeah. To us, so.
If we're required to put roads in, then there's.
So those ones are actually really good.
Understand tomato is why that. Risk side. Now to do. Is that what I'm thinking, or is that the government? Fearing,
And it's the same with some.
fear that it means that.
We want to regulate on the south end perspective where it currently is going well.
We're actually allowed
Over there.
yeah, their economy to carry on. Well, that's what I'm trying to understand, but what is demand? We are still doing
In the National Council with the alliance, their expertise and both groups' expertise to really.
provisions, they still allow to
You could say that's rate of sale and everything that goes through this construction, SDC and
the current of tomato to our industry or business community is. They've got 20 grand cut with it.
That's it, land use type. Growth there is like this.
I mean, that isn't correct, yeah.
Like south round, browse, there's a. Basically start from zero and work up, and depending on the numbers at the end. Yeah, it's very suggestive of route of entry. It's very.
So will that affect those?
Showing balance or
growing out of roles.
This area is about 300 of it.
So we can't do it.
Now remains south road, internalising the text.
Yeah.
Property boundary, as soon as you're outside the boundary, you can't legally require someone to go in that direction. So the premise.
Public nuisance, public nuisance, nuisance going over boundaries. What about private property rights? Private property rights of the national estate that has all these trees affected. Something in reverse. And say, what have you got?
Just told.
That's the situation we go, it's not my tree.
Yeah.
I'll make up the road, that's that tree line.
It's not, the one.
Domestic planting, it's.
Need
You
games to
can't tell where they come
Yeah,
from.
for the ultimate, but I don't take it away from school. But it's actually having that direction to get there. So what do you want from us as such?
So, yeah.
Are there any alternatives to address the government's concerns? I mean, there is one of them standing up to that, saying that we are working and we can certainly discussion that,
Yeah, it's almost like a preaching to the cure. It's almost a cure.
so there won't be any other use of fresh water.
Anyway, it's your cure from the
Yeah,
the one we got, whereas.
Yeah, let's not have them there.
Yeah.
At least there's
Probably
a.
I mean, we just need to
farmland
really
is
get the council
been
done.
shared over approved next month. Fair enough, it's, you know, stock it, you just can't get it.
Still leverage the community.
Tasty country.
So I'm just looking at.
Yeah, well, that's like.
South of Bristol Council is current developers want
So why would you? That's what I'm saying. And we're. They're getting pressure. Industries that utilize.
If they're going to long, they're being blown from a long way from West Dome to Mid Dome.
They actually sort of look at capacity and
It's trying to. Scared them.
I just think we should plant them.
That's what I would need. I mean, if you, no, can you write? I'll let you write that. Giving actual evidence on tomato might work.
Species so that are
I mean,
as opposed to from seeds and
challenging
Under a protected forest, yeah.
Rain area.
Oh, you won't be allowed to do anything.
So much.
I know the Harry Robbins comes down the hill of the Nick Rugby,
Research and trials.
Just trying to word it right. So.
Yeah, so what I've.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about alternatives if I choose to increase the way they're going, how well.
Wait for
Establish a budget.
One example was
Holding issues.
I think this is really important issue because we're definitely talking about conservation.
creating a way pathway.
They made restrictions on farmland. So they-
So too much to wait.
we don't have much necessarily doing in other regions.
Into the day-to-day. When they, and that was one thing was they were saying, I know, I remember the Alliance, which is industry, huge industry.
What is Karen Wilson always telling us?
Conservation means a lot of that to be.
Testing and
Extensive.
research, you know, it's 5 years, right?
So they're going to look for these varieties.
Because they had done nothing for 25, 30 years, but they were saying. Not shutting the industry down, just telling them.
Yeah.
I'm very happy.
We've got clear,
5 or 6 different ingredients, and it's probably.
That's right. It's all sorts of hazard and navigation and all that.
I was going to do that anyway, just to show you what we've worked out 75 years to establish. Imagine maybe
Yeah, so is that within the 7?
yeah, so I'm assuming that's why it allowed literally to make sense for about 2 years for something established. Measure.
I guess the thing is to turn the tap off from the
Makes
planting
sense to me, but
now, and that's probably through the forestry.
Yeah, and I'm planting too, like, for the game rotation. That's where.
And where it is.
What are you doing? Rotation further.
don't use Fiordland as a test.
Still forest, we can still plant.
I just want to hear.
Can't go same species.
Practical
Well,
application.
that's a good
Have a
idea
second lap.
with the fir, because that's not coming out. It isn't.
Emergency management.
It's always early 19 months. We've still got to be waste.
Like, you know,
They have the responsibility to do the prevention and recovery. Oh, you're doing good.
really good. We must be doing about the trade and get some others.
Yeah, I think so. Who's got the timer?
in about 2 minutes and we're going to change. So wrap up your conversations, it'll be time to rotate to the next table.
Yes.
In
Well, one. I got. I'm now right, I really.
The professor teacher extend the research.
We're not gonna go right for
Any other
Another 5
thoughts?
years to see,
next group there.
make you
We
very
need to say that
different
right.
and upgrade.
What are the two homes?
It might be 15 and
Not from the point of view.
You understand we need to emissions or capture emissions, so it's not a no.
Actually use research. We play use of it.
Yeah, first mover advantage.
Yeah, so we've been here.
That discussion, so I don't know whether it's simplification, but actually understanding.
Flood resilience.
Well, it's that
It's protecting
issue
people
that we had with
Other groups will come around here.
Yeah, so if you guys want to range or natural hazards or infrastructure.
Does it give you some?
So maybe it's picked up somewhere
Well,
else.
trade competition advantage.
Yeah.
Well, it's not existing use, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose what supermarkets do now are options.
That's what's
Other supermarkets.
Mitigation act.
They're the only industry that. Front up.
Have you got no natural hazards in there?
We've had to pack it up. Oh, it has to get more. So,
I
we'll do a very good
just write on it, it's great. That's all.
build on.
Allergic to post-it notes.
What are they suggesting?
Morrison has made me allergic to post-it notes.
Yeah. Make us some big ones.
Fresh water.
So effectively, climate changes to the resource management.
Yeah.
Standards for forestry, aims to create efficiencies for forestry operations, consenting and provide clarity for users.
So we've got sheets.
The key proposals are to remove council discretion to impose more stringent regional rules to set environmental standard in relation to afforestation, putting trees in the ground, and to give effect to the management. There are currently no regional rules in place that allow for stringent, allow to be more stringent. There's no guarantee that rules will be put in place in the future, so there are some changes to the slash management moving forward. So they might try and maintain some regulatory tools around
Is there any particular
outdoor related to those big erosions, slash issues. And generally, they want to try and make it easier for forests. Last time, there's quite a conversation around sediment and setbacks, around property, water bodies and roads, and particularly around Southland's dynamic, the lower sun angles, colder days, with frost, impact you get with frosting and impacts on pasture growth. Those aspects.
Hazard erosion.
Yeah.
Well, they are road infrastructure.
Fire security.
You get more. The reality is
Then they'll
that.
worry.
They need-
So they won't be able to.
We get it.
Fix the leaky pipe.
Oh, yeah, you take out $3 million from forestry, you create $20 million worth of damage, like you run out of this money forest.
In the old days, you said.
But this would be especially going back quite a few decades as well.
And it's about-
Yeah.
I would kind of encourage you to do those.
In almost every country, you just never get the
So now we want them to do
talked about road management, sediment impacts of
Yeah.
creating forestry roads, bits and pieces. We got into the wilding calculator, whole forests to account for wildings, reversing severe issues, ability to take action. Basically, if it's on neighbouring land, prevention measures are more effective.
Can I drain it now? Because it wasn't supposed to be there.
Issues, so we're on coding species in certain areas.
So most of them don't, but as long as you're there,
Varieties of wilding levies to manage wildings, major tools to make viable to plant
Oh,
more
that's
species.
not-
And about some positives is actually brought out
It's just,
carbon. Balance out.
But you gotta look at the economics. You know, like. And then obviously going with ETS rules about, you know, if they talk about canopy, smaller areas, every tree counts.
Difficulties around.
It's gonna be huge positive for financial. Dealing with the
So we get that one, already out. Channel.
Because I reckon there's financial tools you can always make natives as attractive. Like, if you do commercial indigenous forests, although it's got a 90-year harvest on beach, for example, you can almost pay out a third of the crop across the 90-year generation, so you're still getting a 30-year return. The trees are staying here, you only get one harvest, as opposed to 3 on the road. So you're basically on the road, you're getting quite a risk gains, plus you're also getting payouts along the way, so you're not losing out long-term views. So economics do stack up, like, not just a plant trees for 90 years down the track.
I mean, they do talk about 100-year when they come to main place it would be one extra one to the university if you're wanting to create within 100 meters of that. So it's
the
tricky
cost of actually.
something that even if that is it would be a 60.
Yeah.
So it's well,
Yeah. Railway tracks out and go along the coastline. Now that's gonna be road.
I haven't gone into detail about it, but if they had a petition to release it,
Should it?
Oh no, the version of natural. Yeah, there was just a
Was that visual effects still better off? I think it's still better off. Because I've.
See, that's quite interesting.
There's an opportunity to, like, when you first rotation of vines, and when you go to harvest and replant, you replant 20% of natives and then 80% of exotics. So you harvest again, you do another 20% of natives, and then you almost get a staggered rotation of natives. So by the time you up right round and getting your last crop of exotics, you're around to your first crop of natives, and you can potentially go around, it's going to be a high value crop.
I feel like it's, yeah, I think it's like I mean, I love there's many valuable minutes within the past and some kind of way
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the themes in the future that might be different in South Africa. I'm just wondering.
would also
My trades and everything.
Yeah, the things that possibly.
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, that's chestnuts. That's not, that's a sort of a negative. That's probably the biggest
And then I
concern
find
for
that
the
way,
language.
it gives you the opportunity.
Royce,
Yeah.
just the names go.
Yeah, well, those-
Yeah,
Well,
and
no,
basically, how
I
do
just have people tuning in.
It's on there, so that'd be great.
Funding can be one effective.
That's the biggest concern. Maybe for me, not being in the neighbourhood.
Depending on how they design the
It's advantageous for us to
it's,
talk about that showing where
so many
he's
different
got
variables, so every example they're missing right up.
three string.
Every situation is
They made money, they made good money.
How much harm does improve something well? You know, if you just see everybody,
Sprayed off.
Cooling just let them do it.
Sprayed.
How much?
They have swapped, and they've swapped the good land with the lower like higher. So, and so they've good farming areas.
I would expect
Put it all
this.
Yeah.
So that's really up to their own.
Yeah, well, the guy who's on
Yeah, that.
Does this create some,
But given that,
But they've
does it create, get a
Nice
is it a TA or a?
land.
I don't know
Therefore,
how to
in
make
the
it.
gun for compensation.
I mean,
Yeah.
I just want to encourage
The solution. Yeah, I never.
In terms of whether it's before they do the work.
A lot of.
Yeah.
But that is, the competition is
Yep.
Kind of need to know what.
Well, that's for the last one, we've got a conversation with council as well.
So this, so proportionality, I'm assuming that's risk in proportion to cost.
No, it's one we've got no idea.
I'm assuming that.
It's kind of a little water right up around.
Take away their.
Unless it.
And relative to cost. Because proportion is a rate, it's just a ratio.
So I think.
To a certain.
Are you at the, way
I
at
don't
the
know.
bench?
Then you have the ECA conversation. It's like, oh, how do you know what that is?
Proportionality thing for me. All right, is there any last thoughts? We'll, time to move to the last table if you've got any further thoughts or anything else you want to talk about.
Council protection mechanisms.
And like, and what our liability. I think Rachel's got one that's made to talk about.
That's what we like.
You must share the illustration. All of those. So maybe the.
What have you decided?
Gonna drain every bit of water out.
Forestry.
Yeah, because we're gonna drain all the water out. Don't worry about the wetlands. We're gonna have desert.
To remove the ability for.
They do. Doesn't matter if it's filled with
Let's turn it into
And why?
Got different sheets here, one page. So we can focus on what you want.
Anything about ETS, it's more just forestry in general.
So these are the options government are putting out.
So what's let's talk about, so the sediment setbacks, property, water bodies and roads. South is quite specific.
So that would be back and wait.
There's a lot of sun angle in winter, frost. So there's
Where
bigger
the level of
impact
details related to what might happen in the national institutes framework changes. But what there will be is introducing additional new objectives.
We go there well.
As well as looking at changes to Tamanawa itself.
Based on forestry, doesn't go that well. Doesn't help.
Questions?
We can talk about wildlife arrangements in terms of
Yeah.
like fox, gun, forestry, exotics, generally endangered, genetically different to bird, road management, we're putting in forestry roads, we got wider roads around hill faces and bits and pieces, and sediment impacts and tax, modeling calculators. Modeling is the key issue, holding foresters to account for wilding, reverse sensitivity, trying to get the ability to foresters to take action, and issues on neighbouring lands, prevention measures are more effective to prevent issues. Non-cloning species in certain areas, so just genetic hybrids or genetic engineering to try and minimise cloning. Wilding levies to manage wilding, other financial tools to make it less viable to plant wilding species. So the premium might say if you're getting a wild tree, then much more expensive. You can try to incentivise the market. Native planting should be ETS, for example, lower cost of actually putting it on the ground, faster growing fields could actually be a solution. Management rise. Identify a couple of positives, which is draw down a carbon balance portfolio from an emissions farm perspective, use a reduction of stock units and catchments. Forestry. So anything you
Well, the only thing is we've seen in some instances where
Interested in service charges, don't
allows
bringing them up to speed for the 21st century and the 18th century when it comes to farms and state functions security programs.
Yeah, but how can you do
On whereas
in some instances,
funding or security programs from a very high
shelter.
model that they've got out there on the, in the public.
Basically, you didn't have to fence
So
stock.
they're using
You fence
what
the
you can say for their business, they should be security programs, including all their costs.
So, you know, there's a lot of rural veterans coming to smaller forestry crops and you want it safely. So there's a whole bunch of
So do you think that will be from the ministry or do
National objectives framework, wetlands provisions, commercial
different
programs.
it'll be
But I'm just trying to articulate it. Why does it, how does it relate to this? To potentially
as a group of councillors, I would think
easier for farmers.
There's a lot of different change there to think about.
Does it mean that sell the entire farm?
Stay there.
Yeah. Sorry, what's
Yeah.
we didn't catch a harvest management.
Because that's the other place, of course, where
Quite painful and
You've been working too hard, taking children in school.
generate security programs.
I've been really out of order, I'm starting to come right, but we're going overseas.
Give me a fee.
for Indigenous biodiversity.
Yeah.
But the freshwater management does direction to move all that
Sorry.
10 years after.
All right, I think we'll call that done for the National Direction Workshop. Rachel's got one matter to work through, and beyond that, thanks very much for your contribution.
Thank you, Steve.
Come to us with some coastal stuff.